not great at something, you might be able to improve a little bit with a lot of focus and attention, but you can move the needle so much further if you just do more of what you're naturally good at, right? So I wish in the beginning that I spent more time leaning into my strengths and less time worrying about, how to fix my weaknesses.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast, our regular discussion with industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Rick Skidmore, CEO and founder of Timberlane, a custom shutter and garage door manufacturer in Montgomeryville, Pennsylvania. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding Podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. Rick, thanks so much for being on the program. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Love being here. Thank you.
Can you please tell me what made you start your company, Timberlane, to make shutters?
So, like a lot of businesses that get started by accident, mine is no different. I had an old home in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I was a kind of a weekend warrior, kind of renovation guy, woodworker, cabinet maker. I did a whole bunch of things. Certainly wasn't a professional, but I was a few notches above, I guess, just a normal DIYer. So anyhow, I had an old home. It needed shutters. Shutters, in my mind, were a fairly straightforward project to make, so I decided I'd make them myself.
What did you think about? Was that a correct assessment? I bet it wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't, right? And like anything else that looks easy on the surface, and then once you get into it, you realize, oh my God, it's like opening up Pandora's box. So, I decided I would make them myself, and I went looking for companies that did it for real, because that's what hobbyist woodworkers do. They try to find a company that is doing whatever project they're trying to make, so they can get design inspiration, they could kind of reverse engineer it, kind of get some proportions, things like that. And I was, really surprised. I couldn't find any companies that actually did it for real. And I stumbled onto a few, but nothing, that I was overly impressed with, candidly. And I realized that I'm in this old town and I have this old house and it needs shutters, and my home is no different than the thousands next to me. And, there's thousands of other communities just like mine. And, the entrepreneurial kind of spark and light bulb went off. And I said, all right, let me do some research to find out if this is kind of a viable business.
So when I got started in this business, I remember your company getting started. When did you open the doors?
1995, so about 27 years ago.
And how many folks are working there now?
We fluctuate, but we're somewhere in the 75 to 80 full-time employees at the moment.
Wow. I'm guessing there are probably less expensive places to make shutters, both domestically and internationally, than outside of Philadelphia. Am I right about that?
You're very right, and that's something that when you start a business, there's often so many decisions that you're either consciously or unconsciously making that you're not even aware could have long-term implications. And that was certainly one of them. I didn't realize that, oh my God, I'm starting a business in an area where, rents of commercial and industrial buildings were, extraordinarily high by comparison to other areas. But it's my home. It's our home as a company. And once you start to hire people and build a team, it's not quite as easy to just get up and leave, because a company at the end of the day is only as good as its team members, right? So if you leave and, half of your team now can't come with you because they have lives in the area, then you don't have the same company.
So how many kind of shutters do you make? You make it clear on your company's website that they're all custom. So how does that work? Can you please talk about that?
Sure. So everything we do is build to order, 100% of our products. So there's no standard sizes. There's nothing that we're making in advance, putting in a box, putting in a warehouse. That doesn't exist. So we've developed over 27 years a fairly extensive library of styles and sticking details and profiles. It's very similar. I will often compare it to kitchen cabinets, right? So kitchen cabinets are a very configured product. You're picking the species of wood, you're picking what type of door style you want, and you're picking all the different profiles finishes, and ultimately your finishes. Shutters are no different.
And like louvered, panel, all these things are available?
Yeah, we do. Probably. I would say round numbers, about half of our shutters tend to be some type of a louvered shutter, and half tend to be some type of a paneled shutter.
So when I've seen shutters manufactured, I believe it might have been on this old house episode. They were using ancient equipment. Are you using like stuff that was period when shutters were in their heyday, or have you automated it with more modern stuff?
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, we certainly had less high-tech equipment, much more, I don't know that I would call it ancient, but older technology.
Yeah.
And over time, I mean, in order to remain competitive in manufacturing, you have to take advantage of technology. So we've brought in a fair amount of automation over the years, not to replace craftsmen, but to do a better job, right? So I mentioned we only have about 80 people, and that's still 80 people, right? But we used to have 120, 130 people. So automation has allowed us to kind of focus on the higher caliber work that requires more artisanal, work and more craftsman approach. And we let the machines do kind of the heavy lifting.
The drudgery, right?
It's the drudgery, yep.
Yeah, it's got to be hard to drill 1,000 holes in a house worth of shutters, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not where a really talented craftsman can bring the most value either.
And I'm guessing you make everything custom because windows, especially on old houses, are all over the board with regard to their sizing, right?
Yeah, well, it's that, and it's also, so we focus at kind of the high end of the market where somebody recognizes the value of, of investing in a custom shutter. And a lot of times our customers' windows rather, have been modified multiple times over the years. There could be storm windows in place. There could be, an addition that now butts into the window. So
it could be not even square.
Most of the times it's not,
Yeah.
right?
I think you'd agree that most of the shutters in our country are purely decorative, and some look better than others. Most don't open, and seldom are they the right size for the window. How did this happen? What changed? Shutters used to be part of keeping your house weather tight. When did it become a plastic decorative thing that didn't even match the size of the window?
Yeah, so that kind of transformation was slow over decades, right? And you were exactly right. Shutters were really an extension of the window, and it helped provide security. It helped even add some additional insulation value to the house. But as window technology and glass technology continued to evolve, the shutters weren't as necessary anymore. So what happened is they became kind of legacy elements from a design perspective on a home, right? And especially kind of neoclassical, traditionally inspired homes, the windows would look bare and they would look naked without shutters. So oftentimes what happens is, what used to be more of a discipline around shutters in terms of sizing them appropriately just started to fade. And then, a shutter was rotted and somebody replaced it, and they went down to a home center or their local millwork place, and they weren't making them custom. They were maybe making them every 4 inches, and their window was 61 inches, not 60, but they bought a 60, right? So yeah, it's become, one of the things we try really hard to guide our customers on is sizing your shutters appropriate to the window, whether or not you're going to use them functionally or not.
Just for aesthetics. It doesn't look right if they're not the right size, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we've all driven down the street and glanced over at a home and saw, a 4-foot tall window with shutters that are 5 foot long hanging off the end or hanging off the top, or worse yet, they're upside down, they're backwards. The hinges are on the front, not the back. So there's a lot of mistakes that can be made.
Do you find yourself like looking at all the shutters when you're driving around Bucks County? I mean, I'm sure it's more popular to do them correctly there owing to the historic architecture, but I'm sure there's many homes that have wonky, misplaced, or wrong size shutters too.
Yeah, for sure. And the curse of being in the shutter business, and I think everybody on my team would say this. We've heard it once, we've heard it hundreds of times over the year. After about the first week here, they're like, I never paid attention to shutters before, but now I can't stop looking at them, and all I see is mistakes, right? So yeah, it's definitely something that happens. And the other thing too, though, Patrick, is things like sizing and how to install a shutter properly. You get good at things that you do often, right? When you're stumbling onto something that you have never done before, or you're trying to just guess, it's not surprising that, even good contractors, and good carpenters are going to make, silly mistakes, but it's not something they focus on every day. So that's why we try to take our job seriously to help guide trade professionals and homeowners to just make sure that they understand the right way and the wrong way to do it, because it doesn't actually take any more time to do things the right way. You just have to know what that is.
It's been well documented that preventing breaches of door and window openings can help homes survive high wind events, hurricanes, tornadoes, and that kind of stuff. Can wood shutters do the job of protecting a house like these storm shutters I see on the Gulf Coast that are often made of aluminum and kind of don't match like the aesthetic of the house? It's purely a functional device.
Yeah, storm shutters are this kind of this nebulous space, right? So to answer your question straight on, technically, yes, a wood shutter can provide storm protection if you modify it and you put, structural elements and, so either aluminum, struts on the back of it, something to kind of give it stability when it's closed. But, having been in the shutter business for 27 years, there's a lot of other materials that can do a better job than wood shutters. And then you layer on top of it, you're in coastal areas where there's strong salt spray and, whether it's a storm shutter or just a piece of trim, wood on the outside of a home in those areas, it's just much more challenging to maintain. So for sure.
Do you get calls from folks on the Gulf Coast or other high wind areas who want their home to look right, but also want the protection of shutters?
We do, right? So there's dozens of great communities that have a focus on architectural elements and architectural style. Most of the Southeast does not. For instance, South Florida is not known for pretty architecture, right? But there are communities around that they do a phenomenal job, and they tend to be more focused on the elements, and they tend to be the projects we get invited onto because that's where we can add value. A lot of masonry structures and block homes, they're oftentimes leaning towards a more utilitarian approach.
Mm-hmm.
Like whether it's a steel roll down shutters or some fiberglass,
panels,
flying stick that get bolted onto the window, just to protect it.
So can I guess about those cities? I'm guessing Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina. Are there others I'm neglecting? I bet Richmond is probably among them.
Yeah. There's tons of them just like that, like Charleston is a classic example. I mean, Charleston has just such rich architecture and just beautiful, thoughtfully planned cities, and then the architecture that just kind of complements everything so well. So those kind of homes it would be a disservice to put, roll down steel shutters on those type of homes.
Agreed. Can you talk about shutter hardware? Oftentimes I see old houses that did have operational shutters, but something happened. Can you still get that stuff? Do you guys make it?
Yeah, and hardware is so I often talk about a really good, a well-executed shutter job takes getting three things right. The first is you have to pick the right type of shutter. And of course, get it sized properly, which we talked about.
Can I interrupt you there? So the right shutter means it's architecturally appropriate. You're not going to put top hinged Bahama style shutters on your Charleston mansion, right?
Yeah, and every area, it's hyper regionalized, right? So every area will, like for instance, you go down to Charleston, you will see a specific type of louvered shutter there that you don't tend to see elsewhere. That's typically, there's not a real complicated reason why. A lot of times it's just because there was a strong millwork shop that was there for 50 or 60 years.
And they made all the shutters.
They just supplied all the shutters, right? And that's the style that they used. And so historians will often go, well, that's appropriate for Charleston. Well, that's not necessarily, it's right because that is what's in Charleston, but it doesn't mean that that's Charleston specific, right? It's getting the right type of shutter. And the other thing we guide people is there's only a short list of like hard, fast do's and don'ts in terms of picking shutter styles, right? But a lot of times at the end of the day, home styles are an amalgamation of styles. So a lot of times it comes down to what the homeowner, the architect, the design professional, what look they're after, right? So we'll see louver shutters on first and second floor and it looks great. We'll see paneled shutters on first and second floor and it looks great. If it's in, a really stringent historical district, they may have tighter guidelines and they may be more specific in terms of what they want. Yeah, but back
What
to
else
hardware,
is
which was your question. The second thing is hardware. So you have to get the shutters installed. And going back to the beginning of our conversation about how shutters are used functionally, in order to use them functionally, they have to have functioning hardware, right? And it's going to have a hinge and it's going to have a pintle. And the pintle is that term for that little pin, that apparatus, and they come in hundreds of different styles that gets mounted onto the window frame, where the actual hinge then engages on top of the pin. And some of the challenges with hardware is, windows used to be 100% wood, really beefy wood frames, wide casements, tons of surface area to mount hardware. Over time, the window frames have become much more compressed. They're really narrow. In some cases, there's no casing around a window, or it's 3/4 of an inch wide, and you just don't have the mounting area. So we have replicated, at least in our 27 years in this business, we have replicated probably 95% of most of the hardware that we have discovered across the U.S. and we've developed, and we do manufacture it ourselves, and with a whole host of manufacturing partners that we work with.
Is it brass? Is it iron? What is the material, generally speaking?
We have a range of materials, but I would say the majority of it is either cold rolled steel, it's either stainless steel, it could be bronze or brass, depending on the type of parts. And then, we're going to go over it with an E-coat system, which is kind of a slightly more durable version of a powder coating process. So you get into a coastal area, you're going to want stainless steel, right? Just because you're going to want to give it that extra corrosion resistance properties. But for areas that don't have that concern as much, you can just go with steel.
And the hardware is designed for shutters because they're meant to be easy to remove, to paint and maintain, right? Like
Yes.
They should lift off the pintle if they have the right hardware. Am I correct?
They should, and if they're installed properly, they will, right? And the other element to a good look is all of that hardware adds dimensionality and it adds additional texture. Oftentimes it's introducing an element of black iron, which is the most common color in shutter hardware. So it's not just the shutters, it's the shutter and kind of the harmony between the both.
And there's a special component, I believe it's called a holdback. Is that right? That holds the shutter open?
Yeah, so they're called a lot of different things, and there's a lot of slang terms for them. There's shutter tiebacks, shutter dogs, holdbacks, and all that is, and there's dozens of different styles. Probably the most common that most people will resonate with is an S, like an S hook, right?
Right.
And typically that is at the bottom of the shutter towards the outside of the shutter, and it's typically on a bolt or a hanging rod that gets screwed into the house, and it just kind of pivots, so you can kind of tilt it, close the shutter, and then it'll revert back to a vertical position.
You touched on it a little bit, but so how can you tell like the right hardware or good hardware from bad or incorrect? Is it you're looking to history? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that when you think of construction and product design, especially in the residential and kind of historically sensitive space, we tend to look back. Let history be our guide, right? For instance, joinery, we know that a mortise and tenon joint is the strongest joint because we see evidence of that from products that were built 200-300 years ago that are still standing up. So with hardware, it's kind of no different. Years ago, the gauge of the steel would have been much thicker. It would have been a casted piece, and it would have been just much more substantial. So a lot of times today, you'll see kind of throwaway hardware that's just pretty junky, that's not going to last, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of what makes the right hardware for a specific application, it really depends on the size of the shutter. It depends on the window conditions and what your mounting area is. So that's why each kind of job and even down to each window becomes a specific set of decisions that you want to make.
I hadn't thought about it, but of course you have to tell folks the right hardware and how much you need, and right? Yeah, I didn't think of that because they have to work together.
Yeah, and that is, I think, where we've got a really experienced team of design professionals that's all they do is this. So we can guide people with pictures and FaceTime videos, and it's a quite common occurrence to go into our sales area and see people, our reps on the phone, with a video of a customer focusing in on the window frame, just so we can kind of see what they're dealing with, so we can be in a position to recommend the right hardware.
That's cool. So you more recently started making roll-up garage doors and carriage doors, right? Can you talk about those offerings and how that came about?
Yeah, so we've been we've kind of been quietly in that space. We just didn't make it a focus for a number of years. But what we saw time and time again is our clients, and whether it's architects, homeowners, design professionals, anybody who's kind of has a strong influence on a project, is saying, "Hey, these shutters are awesome. Can you carry that theme? Can you carry that panel, that sticking detail over into the garage doors?" And the reality of it is, there's a lot of elements in an overhead garage door that are or even a swing out garage door that are very similar to what goes into a shutter. So it's not a real heavy lift for us. So what we focus on, the garage door industry is really big, because most homes have a garage, although 95% of the market is dominated by what they call steel pan doors that are uninsulated, these stamped out doors. They're pretty ugly. They don't offer any R value. They don't really add any, architectural, uniqueness to the house. So we stay far away from probably 98% of the market, and it's no different than shutters. Where we excel is for projects where somebody wants something really specific. They're trying to match sticking detail. Their opening is a non-standard size, or they're trying to do just something special with it, and that's where we come in.
I feel like any good carpenter could put up a set of shutters with some direction, right? It seems like a garage door is a very specialized trade. Do you have difficulty finding folks that put in the doors, or is it a normal garage door company? How does that work?
Yeah, well, you're spot on. So putting up a set of shutters, there's nuances, and I don't want to say you could do it in your sleep, but in terms of complexity, scale of complexity, it's a whole lot easier than a garage door. Garage door, first of all, it's a lot heavier, it's a lot bigger. You're dealing with springs torsion
and cables,
springs.
yeah.
You have to be real careful, because they can be dangerous if you don't install them properly. And then you have jam conditions, and you have a trolley operator, or there's just a lot. And now there's electronics that come into the package, the operator package, whether it's sensors, whether it's tie-ins to alarms, there's a keypad. So we partner with some of the best independent garage door installers around the U.S., and then we will bring them on as subcontractors to actually do the installation for us. In a local area, we've got partners with folks that are kind of in our backyard, but in the area that's not in our backyard, we just we know who the top craftsmen are in specific markets, and they're the ones we want to work with.
The garage doors are beautiful. I mean, like you said, the steel pan garage doors are really not going to do anything for the aesthetics of your house.
Yeah.
But I can see your garage doors would help maintain an architectural character that someone is going for.
No, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have them on your house?
I do.
We'll talk more about that in a little bit.
Okay.
So where are your most of your products sold? I'm guessing it's probably in the southeast of Pennsylvania, owing to the company headquarters and the rather notable architecture of that area.
Yeah, so we're all over the U.S., but our heaviest concentration is the eastern seaboard, from Massachusetts, all the way down to the East Coast, kind of hugging the coast. Someone once mentioned it years ago, and I thought it really resonated. It's like the original 13 colonies, right?
Yeah.
Of the U.S. is where the oldest architecture and the oldest structures are. And since we really focus on traditional architecture, it's no surprise that it just mushroomed out from those areas. So, we're probably 60, 70% eastern seaboard, the balance peppered throughout the U.S. And there's dozens of markets from Texas to California to the middle of the country that, where there is hypersensitivity around architecture. And then there's areas that, like for instance, New Mexico, we don't do a whole lot of business in New Mexico just because the architecture there doesn't lend itself to what we do.
I bet originally they had shutters, but now everyone has air conditioning, right? So, yeah, interesting. Has your company experienced challenges owing to COVID, like other companies I've talked to?
Sure. I mean, I don't think anybody is immune to what's gone on in the last 2+ years. First and foremost, I think the landscape of talent and employees and kind of just the whole lens at which we view the world in terms of how we want to live our life and work has changed, right? So companies had to adapt, they had to evolve, they had to pay attention to what was going on and really push themselves. We had to push ourselves way out of our comfort zone just to continue to stay relevant and to continue to meet the needs of our team, right? And our company, is a little unique, not unique in the manufacturing world because we're no different than any other manufacturing company. But, for instance, a software company where all of their employees are kind of intellectual workers, right, where they can work on a laptop. Two-thirds of our employees are working in our production facility, right? And you can't do that out of your living room. You have to come into a plant, right? So we had to put in all kinds of, safety protocols, and certainly in the early days of COVID, where there was distancing. But like today, we're no different. We have employees. Some of our employees work remotely, right? And one of the things that we've learned through this, which I think a lot of companies did, is that you can actually be just as productive if you put the right focus on it and you have the right lens on how you're navigating it. So yeah, and then there's supply chain challenges that, getting materials, the cost, the hyperinflation that we're in. So it's a challenging time to be in any business right now, for sure.
Where is your lumber coming from? Has that been affected with the pandemic and supply chain snafus we've had lately?
Yeah, so most of the wood that we use, they tend to be more exotic species that are not grown in the U.S., right? So we're bringing it in, whether it's from Africa, South America, Indonesia, whether it's some type of mahogany. So yeah, we've certainly, I think we do a good job with our sourcing partners to stay way ahead of it. So one of the things that we had to do just to hedge some risk is take on larger positions, so we have a little bit of breathing room in the event that there's a continued shortage of containers, for instance, or COVID is just now catching up to a country that you would think that they already dealt with it, but there's some countries right now, specifically like Ghana, that's struggling with COVID just because there's such a long lag. So yeah, it's been a challenging time.
So you're keeping more inventory just because you don't know what interruption might await you.
Yeah, we have to, because if we run out, we can't go down to the local supply store to get it, because this is wood that we're buying 6-9 months in advance. We're getting dried to a specific moisture content. We're getting it cut to a certain size, and it's not a readily available commodity.
One of the things I've heard over and over again, COVID and otherwise, is that it's difficult to find skilled workers. Are you having challenges in that regard too? I noticed your website had one ads or hiring notices on there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so the skilled trades have really gotten beat up with COVID, right? Because you got supply and demand, and there's more demand than there is supply right now. So there's an absolute shortage, for sure. What we've found over time is our business, at least our manufacturing processes and the work that we do, it's stuff that we've developed over time. So we have found that the best craftsmen come to us with a strong foundational set of skills, but then they've got to spend a lot of time working in our environment to understand how to do what we do, right?
It's very specialized, right?
It's very specialized.
Likely a carpenter has not been a shutter manufacturer previously, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, for instance, carpenters, if you were a framing carpenter or a trim carpenter, you're working in the field, more times than not, that type of individual is not going to flourish as well in an inside environment as they did in the field. So these are all the little things that we've had to kind of figure out and dial in over time.
I'm going to change gears here a little bit, but it's something that interests me greatly. Entrepreneurship involves financial risk, long hours, and a long list of recurring and new things to worry about. I think you'd agree. What do you think makes someone want to do that? What made you want to start your company?
Yeah, so entrepreneurs are a funny bunch, right? They tend to be nonconformist. They tend to take the road less traveled, right? They tend not to like to be controlled, right? So you think about all of these things. I've often said I'm unemployable today because I've been on my own for so long that I would make a horrible employee. So I think that the life of an entrepreneur, it's a package deal, right? So there is a lot of risk. There is a lot of uncertainty, but you also get to kind of create your own future. You get to do things in a way that aligns with the vision that you have. And oftentimes, like for instance, when I got into the shutter business, I had a vision to create a different type of company and a different type of go-to-market strategy, right? And so when you do something on your own, you can just decide, I'm going to build it in this way, right? And so I love what I do, and I love being an entrepreneur because it gives me kind of the ability to kind of chart my own future and then, create an environment where I can attract and then bring people along with me.
Do you talk to other entrepreneurs? Do you feel like have a similar worldview with regard to wanting to create something, wanting to be their own boss, wanting to control their future?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm involved in a lot of different organizations and, have a fairly large network of peers that are also CEOs, entrepreneurs. And there's a lot of commonality out there, for sure.
I read a little bit about your bio. You didn't come from a manufacturing background, is that correct?
No, not at all. So I was going to be a lawyer out of in college, and I decided not to go to law school because I was a horrible student, which gets back to,
Right.
most entrepreneurs have severe ADD. I have severe ADD, so I made a horrible student, right? But those same things that make it a challenge for somebody that struggles with ADD becomes a superpower when you're in business because you have to juggle a lot of things, right? And you have to do that well. So no, I was going to be a lawyer, decided not to do that, went to work in the financial services and investment industry for 5 or 6 years out of college. Did well, hated the industry, hated being an employee, hated working for a large company that really was detached from the kind of the employees and the folks that were actually making things possible in their company. So I, knew at some point I was destined to be on my own. I just didn't know what it would be. So when I stumbled onto this idea to make shutters, I didn't have any classically trained, experience around this, but I knew I could, align myself and surround myself with people that knew what I didn't know and learn from them.
With the benefit of hindsight, is there anything you would have done differently, knowing what you know now when you started your company?
Yeah, I probably would have embraced what I didn't know, right? So a lot of times what we'll do, the collective we, is we will spend an awful lot of time and energy obsessing over our weaknesses. And then we will spend all this time trying to fix and strengthen our weaknesses. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that that's a waste of energy. I mean, because chances are, if you're not great at something, you might be able to improve a little bit with a lot of focus and attention, but you can move the needle so much further if you just do more of what you're naturally good at, right? So I wish in the beginning that I spent more time leaning into my strengths and less time worrying about how to fix my weaknesses.
I saw a pretty interesting interview where you discussed how your company has benefited by employing special needs adults, at least one. Can you talk about that a little, please?
Yeah, so it's I have a personal kind of attachment to that. I have a sister who's a year younger than me that is intellectually challenged and has kind of the cognitive ability of about a 5 or a 6-year-old. And I grew up in that environment. She was my sister, right? And I watched the challenges that my parents had as she got into adulthood. Kind of having her enter into society as a productive individual, right? And I just realized that our society does a horrible job of accommodating what are large numbers of, and I don't even like the word disability. I kind of prefer to look at it in terms of intellectually challenged, right? So I have a sister. I watched the challenges over, so I have a soft spot for sure. And I guess about 20 years ago, I got accidentally introduced to an individual who was very similar to my sister, lived not too far from a facility we had at the time, talked to her sister, and she said, Steve would love to work, but nobody will hire him. And I said, well, we'll hire him. And so we hired Steve, and Steve ended up working for us for 10 or 12 years. And that taught me so much, one, about giving back, two, about the special qualities that happen to a company's culture when you embrace that. So over time, we have hired many individuals with intellectual disabilities. It's a challenge because you have to make accommodations, you have to kind of lower your bar sometimes, but I promise you that these individuals have a passion that you just don't see, and there's a sense of appreciation and pride in everything that they do that just warms your heart, and that just makes for even a richer culture and work environment.
Have you found any resources that are helpful to someone who might be considering hiring a special needs individual? Is there any help out there?
There are, and there's some agencies that do a wonderful job, and we work with a few of them. They tend to be at the local level, right? So they tend to be at the county level, right? And that's, I would encourage if somebody's listening that, has a company or would like to do something similar, I'd get in touch with their local social services and just start poking around to find the right unit that helps, intellectually challenged adults either enter the workforce. Because there's lots of programs too that they'll provide support, because there's a lot of things you have to learn, that most companies don't know how to do because they have never done it before, so they need some help.
Right. This is perhaps my favorite part of the show. Can you please tell me about your own house? I'm gathering it's colonial. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. So I have an old quintessential farmhouse in Bucks County. So it's a stone farmhouse. The original house was built in 1787. Small one-room house. Over time, there were multiple additions. It's not a very big house. I think maybe 1900 square feet. But I meticulously, over many years, kind of restored it, from repointing to stone to, changing the floor plan and everything in between. I have an old barn that I also restored. And, there's a richness to these old homes that, you have to appreciate. And I think they deserve to, of course, my opinion is biased, but I think, there's nothing more special you can do than to take an old home and just bring it back to its original, losing my words. You're bringing it back to its original vision.
Yeah. The area where you live, it was a pretty safe bet when I said I bet your home is colonial. And right. There's a strong masonry tradition that is less so in New England. I don't, settled similarly, but you have a lot of stone buildings where you are. Did you realize growing up that you lived in a special place architecturally?
So I didn't grow up in Bucks County. I grew up actually in Philadelphia. But interestingly enough, I grew up in an old stone house. It just wasn't a farmhouse, right? Mm-hmm. But no, I didn't have an appreciation for where we are in the country in terms of how significant the architectural movement, was. I didn't really kind of fully appreciate it until, I became an adult.
And you start driving around or traveling around. Right. That's when it sinks in, right? No,
for sure.
Do you have operable shutters on all your windows, Rick?
I do. Could you imagine if I didn't? So, yeah, for sure.
Was that were they on the house? Did you have to put them back?
Yeah, so when I was restoring the home, there was, my home was no different than all the homes of all of our clients that we see every day. It was an amalgamation of, shutters that had clearly been replaced at multiple different intervals, so nothing matched, nothing was the right size. Most of them were falling apart. So I put all new windows in the house, so it was a great opportunity to just redo the shutters.
And are they louvered or are they panels? What did you go with?
So I did a little bit of both. So I put louvered shutters on the second floor, and I did a combination of louver and paneled shutters on the first floor.
And all the operable hardware, you can close them if you want to?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, for sure. Now, to your point, I never closed them. Right? Yeah.
It surprised me in our earliest part of our conversation. You said you got to this by being a DIYer. Do you still like working on your house?
Yeah, it's my Zen space. So I do all, I don't want to say all the work. I would say the majority of the work I do in my house, and I still take on fairly big projects, myself. I have a shop in my house, and I'll make furniture projects still. And yeah, for sure.
I think that's really pretty darn cool. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Rick. Is there anything you'd like to ask or tell our audience? How about the website of your company and social media handles to start?
Yeah, for sure. And it was great, Patrick. So timberlane.com, TIMBERLANE.com. And you can find us at Timberlane on just about every social channel out there.
Anything else you'd like to ask or tell our audience before we part company?
I would say if you're thinking about doing shutters, pay attention to just sizing. So many people get that wrong. I know we kind of joked about it and talked about it a lot in our conversation, but it doesn't actually cost any more to size your shutters the right way, and it makes such a remarkable difference when they're sized properly.
I agree with that. Yep. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Rick. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no, Patrick, this was great. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Rick Skidmore for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to FHB podcast or FHBpodcast.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Size your shutters, right, please?